right, we'll call the meeting back to order. Commissioner Maggio, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've already done a roll call. We don't need to do another one, do we?
That's a good question. No, we're
Okay.
fine.
Still here.
All right. So we'll move to report of the closed session agenda.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. The Rent Stabilization Commission convened at 6:30 for a closed session meeting, discussed only the items on the posted agenda and took no reportable action, and finished about 6:50 p.m.
Thank you. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda for this evening?
Yes.
Yes. Move to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have an approved agenda. And the minutes, there's one minor change that was made in the versions I believe you have in your packets. We just added the words...
For lack of quorum,
for
I
lack
believe.
of quorum, thank you. Are there any changes to the minutes?
I move approval as amended.
And I second?
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And there's abstention?
I'm also abstaining. I wasn't present.
2 abstentions. Do we have any public comments?
Not at this time.
All right, we'll move into commissioner comments. No, I'm sorry, director manager.
Good evening. In your mail, you do have the director manager's look-ahead schedule. I'd like to point out we have put meetings on there through July. Your commission meetings are May 10th, June 14th, June 28th, July 12th, and July 26th. Currently, you have 2 appeals scheduled on the meetings of May 10th, June 14th, and June 28th. I've also included 3 other meetings on your calendar, and we will, I'd like the commission as your item later in the evening to review your calendars and confirm if you are available for those meetings. So I'll hold off on that until we get to item A under unfinished business. This concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions? No? All right, thank you. Now we'll move to commission comments.
I have one. I just wanted to mention that I attended the New Renters Alliance at Plummer Park last night. It was well attended. And I would like to congratulate the organizers who conducted an excellent meeting and brought together many people in the community. And that type of activism needs to be complimented, and I'm doing it now. Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move right into our first public hearing. The commission will hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution consistent with the judgment and ruling of the court in 1991 Investment Company LLC versus City of West Hollywood. Do we need a staff report on this, or would we go right into commission discussion?
Do we have to have a public hearing?
If there are any questions, we can address any questions, but I think everything's in the staff report.
Do we have any questions for the attorneys? No. Do we have any public comments on this? I guess.
None were submitted this time.
All right. We'll close the public hearing and go right into commission comments. Or deliberations. Does anyone have any comments? So we could entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I'll make that motion. I would move that we adopt Resolution RSC 18-526,
a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood vacating in part the May 12th, 2016 action, Resolution RSC 16-485, to affirm the hearing examiner's decision consistent with the peremptory writ of mandate issued by the Los Angeles Superior Court on March 22nd, 2018 in a case titled 1991 Investment Company, LLC versus the City of West Hollywood, case number SC 126375.
Do we have a second?
I will second the motion.
And is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll go into a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Gregoire,
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian,
Aye.
Commissioner Charity,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein,
Aye.
Chair Kerpies.
Aye. Thank you. The motion has been approved. That brings us to our first appeal. Our first appeal is going to be D4268, 8231 Fountain Avenue. An appeal of a rent reduction. Do we have the tenant and landlord representatives present? Either? This is for 8231 Fountain Avenue. All right. Without objection, could we maybe hold this and do the second one first, just in case
That's fine.
they show up? Is there any objection to that?
I don't have an objection.
Okay.
That might be a good idea because
Just
it's
in
only a
case.
couple minutes after.
Yeah. So we will postpone that for just a few moments, and we'll go to the appeal D4296, 836 North Westbourne Drive, number 102, a rent reduction appeal. Do we have the tenant or landlord present, representatives for this? All right. Sir, who are you representing? Tenant, okay. Good. All right, thank you. We'll start with a staff report on the item, and then we will have, we'll ask the appellant to come up and speak first, and then you'll be able to divide your time up in half, or divide your 5 minutes up, and then and save some time for rebuttal, and then we'll listen to I believe in this case, it's the tenant. Is that the appeal?
There's a landlord and a tenant appeal on this one, right?
Oh, that's right, okay.
Both, right.
So I'm not sure how that one works, but we'll start with the staff report.
All
And
right. So whoever filed the appeal first would go first.
Okay.
And I believe it's, oh, yes, the appeal was followed by Mr. Wachtel on March the 5th, so he would be able to go first.
Okay.
In this case, both the landlord and the tenant have appealed the hearing examiner's decision. The tenant, Daniel Zimmer, applied for a determination of the maximum allowable rent and a rent reduction for, among other things, a doorbell and a living room air conditioner. The hearing examiner denied a rent reduction for the doorbell, but awarded a $5 rent reduction for the air conditioner. Excuse me. The tenant appeals on the grounds that the hearing examiner erred in concluding that the doorbell was not a common area issue. He argues that all 16 units have hardwired doorbells that are 100% powered by common building wiring. In his appeal, the tenant includes claims that were not introduced at the hearing, which the commission cannot consider. But in any event, the request for a rent decrease was for inoperable doorbells, not the wiring. And the evidence supports the hearing examiner's conclusion that this is an individual unit, not a common area issue. The landlord appeals on the grounds that there was no substantial reduction in the air conditioner. He also includes new evidence that the commission can't consider, but just looking at the record before the hearing examiner, there is not sufficient evidence to justify a rent reduction. There's no dispute that the landlord replaced an inoperable air conditioning unit with a substantially similar unit that operates properly. While there may be a minor difference in one feature, that does not constitute a substantial reduction of housing services that's defined under the RSO. The landlord also argues that the MAR determination rent overcharge is punitive when it's due to a lack of a re-registration form. The RSO prohibits rent increases until the unit is re-registered. If the owner takes them anyway, that's considered an illegal overcharge, and those amounts are awarded back to the tenant. Under state law, these repayments are restitution and are specifically not considered a penalty. Thus, staff recommends that the commission affirm in part and reverse in part the hearing examiner's decision. Thank you.
Thank you. And you said that Mr. Zimmer filed his appeal first?
Sorry, Mr. Wachtel filed on March the 5th, and Mr. Zimmer filed on March the 7th.
All right. Mr. Wachtel, are you here, or representatives? All right. So we'll have you come to the podium. We'll have you speak first. If you could provide your name and city of residence for the record, state how you'd like to divide your time. You have 5 minutes. You can divide that any way you'd like to save some time for rebuttal. And then we'll begin after you. It's a little bright up here, isn't it? First of all, how would you like to divide the 5 minutes up?
I think just going to help her out with it. Right, I didn't see this.
I mean, how much?
3
Yeah,
minutes,
Perfect.
3.5 minutes, and then leave a minute to a minute and a half for rebuttal if necessary.
Okay.
And please try to speak into the microphone for us.
Microphone.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
A little bit closer.
Can you hear me now? Now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good evening.
Almost ready. One moment, please.
He's working the timer right now. Just one moment.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The re-registration requirement is an ordinance meant to prevent landlords from engaging in illegal practices, such as raising rent by an amount not authorized by the City of West Hollywood or by raising rent with greater frequency than permitted. We have not done either of these things. We have been in complete compliance with the intent of the law. Furthermore, the intent is to protect individuals, not corporations. Civil Code 1947.7, parentheses A, acknowledges that the rent stabilization program can be complex. This subdivision, which was quoted by the mediator, further notes that the intent of the legislature is to limit the imposition of penalties and sanctions against an owner who has in good faith attempted to comply with this complex regulatory process. The reference to California Civil Code, section 1947.7b, is misstated and taken out of context. Subdivision B provides exclusive remedies of restitution to the tenant or recovery of the registration or filing fees when an owner is in substantial compliance. Here, this is a first-time violation. We have been in substantial compliance all this time, and therefore request that the remedy be the lesser of the two options, which would be the reimbursement of the registration or filing fees. This was an administrative error on the part of our leasing agent and prior manager, who is no longer there. We voluntarily registered the unit upon realizing the missing document. We feel, based upon our voluntary correction of the defect without the need for notice from the local agency and the fact that this is a first violation, that the remedy, restitution to the tenant, should be the lesser of the two available options. If restitution has to be made, we require clarification as to which entity to make payment and the address to send it to. The rent checks have been paid by Daniel Zimmer Productions, LLC, which is a Nevada-based LLC, which has an address in Las Vegas, Nevada. The address on the check corresponds to MailLink, which is the registered agent for the LLC, and a post office box location, not the address of the resident, of the so-called resident. Is that it?
Thank you. Can I have you state your name for the record?
Carolyn David.
Thank you.
And city of residence?
I beg your pardon?
Your city of residence?
My city of residence?
Yes, ma'am.
Irvine.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? All right. Thank you. We'll have reserved your time for after the rebuttal, or for rebuttal. And the tenant, Mr. Zimmer? And you'll have 5 minutes to speak. If you could start with your name and city of residence, state, or I guess you don't need to divide your time. And we'll go from there.
Okay, good evening. Daniel Zimmer, West Hollywood, California. I'll divide my time 3.5 minutes.
Actually, there won't be any division because the landlord was first, you're second, and then it'd go back to the landlord.
Oh, okay, got it. So
You have your whole 5 minutes,
all
yep.
5 minutes. Okay. All right, great. Thank you for your time tonight, counselors, or commissioners. I have nothing to speak to in regards to the re-registration of the MAR. I'm fine with that. I think the law is very cut and dry on that. The reason why I'm here in appealing is for the doorbells as a common area issue, and also for the recommendation by the staff to reverse the $5 deduction that I received for the living room air conditioner. Beginning with the doorbells, the first point that I would like to make or ask, in the consideration of appeal that was just read by Ms. Reagan, it states that I have presented new evidence that wasn't given at the onset of this process, and I'd like to know what those new claims are. I feel like I've just been reiterating what I've said and presented since the very beginning. I'm curious, I know that you met privately for 20 minutes and that was for 2 appeals, but if the department staff reviewed all of the evidence prior to their consideration, including listening to the recording from the initial hearing, et cetera, because I still feel like they're missing something. What this comes down to basically is 16 units that all have individual doorbells. Every button just rings inside each apartment, but we have no control over those doorbells. The breakers in our units do not control the power to them. We can't turn them on and off. All of the power that is supplied to these doorbells goes into one breaker in our laundry room, and all the way back in December 2014, all of us lost power to our doorbells. And that is when I first started complaining to the landlord to have this fixed. So I'm not sure how this has been twisted into becoming an individual issue. Currently, the doorbells are working since the appeal, even after we were told in writing that it was an impossibility. They're fixed. I'm not looking for a rent reduction, but this sets a precedent moving forward if the doorbells were to go out again, that now it's an individual issue, and you can't have a hardwired doorbell that you had since you moved in, et cetera. So I'm looking for clarification on that. That's what I'm arguing, is that it's a common area issue. I think they go on to say that it's about the doorbell and not the wiring, but I've always said since the beginning that they lost power. Power is electrical wiring. One is the other. So the doorbell is a symptom of that wiring problem. So I feel like that's also then a safety issue, which I'd said in my initial evidence. It's all here. In the packet that you all have from my initial hearing, you can see in multiple different emails where it says whole building, building wide, electrician can't locate the problem. Sorry, 5 minutes, TikTok. There were even texts submitted as an exhibit during the hearing that you have copies of, but the copies are not legible, where the handyman that is currently employed with our building said that he has to deal with the situation as a whole. It's not an individual issue, and that the breakers was a building-wide issue. So moving on from that, with the air conditioner, I believe they said in the consideration or the recommendation that the lack of a oscillating feature, which is where the vents swing and move automatically, and it moves the air around, it better circulates the room or the air, was not a substantial. It's considered a minor difference. And they notated a Santa Monica v. hearing board. It's in the footnotes. Anyways, I looked at that, and that appears to me that it was mostly about a jacuzzi heater, and that's a luxury amenity, and I don't understand how that would have set precedent for my air conditioner. Air conditioning is something that falls under health and safety and habitability. So I just kind of I don't agree with that. I've never said that this air conditioner has any less stats than what I had before, but this feature clearly circulates the air better and more efficiently and helps alleviate cold and hot spots. And the hearing examiner understood that.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Zimmer?
The air conditioner is in the living room, is that correct?
It's in the living room. That is correct.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
Is the new air conditioner is about the same size as the old one?
The size and the stats, the BTUs, everything is identical with the exception of this feature.
The feature, the vents.
The oscillating, yeah. The current air conditioner, you can change the way the air blows if you walk up to it and move it, and then the air is stationary. The previous air conditioner, the vents moved up and down and side to side on their own. When I first submitted this evidence prior to the hearing, I included a video as an attachment to an email that Mr. Noonan was CC'd on. I was not able to submit that video into evidence at the hearing because the hearing examiner says whatever she can take with her on paper, but that video had been submitted as well.
Okay.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
If I understood you correctly, when you were discussing the doorbell, it sounds as if you're withdrawing your objections to that you are looking to set a precedent as far as the wiring, but you're withdrawing your objections to the decision about the doorbell. Is that correct?
I'm saying that I'm withdrawing. There's no need for a rent reduction because since the decision was made, they're now working. So I'm not after money, but the decision of it being a individual issue instead of a building issue, that is what I'm fighting, yes, because of setting a precedent. That is correct.
Mr. Zimmer, do you pay your rent on your name or the LLC? Or is it, I should say, is it consecutive what you pay when you pay your rent?
Yeah, it's always been paid from an LLC.
Okay.
I have a residence.
There's no right or wrong answer. I just
yeah.
wanted to, okay.
It's always been an LLC, and an LLC is even written on my lease. But
Thank you.
I'm the tenant or the occupant.
Thank you.
If I may, where do you usually get the correspondence from the landlord to your residency address, or it goes to the Nevada LLC address? If let's say if you get any letters from the owner.
If I get a notice from the landlord?
Yeah, any mail from the landlord if there was any letters.
All notices are sent to the 836 Westbourne address here.
Okay.
I've received general mail and certified mail. Notices are taped to the door on occasion.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions? All right. Thank you. You can have a seat.
Thank you.
And Ms. Davis, is that right? Okay. And how much time left is?
2 minutes and 20 seconds.
Ooh, I don't need that much time.
Okay.
I am not going to address...
If you could bring the microphone closer to you, sorry.
Sorry, I'm not going to address the air conditioner because he has a like product to what he had previously. I do want to address the doorbell issue because part of what I said earlier was that we have always been in compliance with maintenance of the building. And when Mr. Zimmer comments that the doorbell wasn't working, I want to iterate that there is some trial and error in repairs. And sometimes the repair works the first time, and sometimes it takes a second or third time. And as he clearly indicated, we kept working, and now everyone has a working doorbell. And I think it's really important to know that it's not magic. It takes time and effort, and we've put both in. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We will move to public, or I'm sorry, do we have any questions? Sorry.
Yeah, Chair Corpus, I probably have a couple of questions for staff or legal counsel. Regarding the doorbell, I understand that the wiring, it's a common area wiring that supplies electricity to the individual doorbells. So I agree that the doorbell is an individual service. But my question is, if in the future the doorbell stops working, the tenant still can file a new complaint, right? So the ruling that this is a common area wiring that supplies the electricity. So it doesn't prevent the tenant in the future to file a complaint if the doorbell is not working.
Right, it's up to the individual tenant to decide whether he or she has a problem with their doorbell and wants to submit a
Right,
rent
it has to
decrease
be
application.
individually, unit by unit issue.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. As for the air conditioner, I had a couple of questions, but the tenant is basically explained, so nothing further.
Anyone else have any other questions before we begin our deliberations? I guess maybe I do have, no, I don't have any questions. Sorry. Anyone would like to begin?
I generally support staff's recommendation tonight. I'm not particularly worried about the precedential value of the hearing examiner's decision as to whether a doorbell could be a common area housing service. It clearly can be, and this decision doesn't really have any precedential value with respect to that issue. It was a finding of fact by the hearing examiner, so I'm not really concerned about that. And I agree that I agree that the hearing examiner's decision should be affirmed on the maximum allowable rent and and reversed with respect to the air conditioning. It seems to me that there wasn't a substantial reduction of a housing service there. So I would vote to along with staff's recommendation this evening.
Thank you. Anyone else like to? Mr. Maggio?
Other than I do concur.
All
right. I would support the staff's recommendation, and I just wanted to clarify the doorbell issue. I believe the doorbell is an individual service, and if in the future it doesn't work, so the tenant may file a new complaint. I just wanted to clarify for the record. As in regards to the air conditioners, I believe there is a substantial restoration of the service. It doesn't have to be exact the same appliance, the same item replaced by, and the tenant himself confirmed that it has actually some other features, and it's the same size. So I agree with staff's recommendation to reverse the $5 rent reduction, because I don't believe there is a reduction in services. As for the MAR determination, maximum allowable rent determination, the overcharge, that is the rent stabilization ordinance that prohibits any rent increases until the registration form is filed. It is a technicality, but that's the law, and I don't. And this is not a punitive decision. It's the overcharge that the owner cannot impose on the tenant if the form is not filed. So I agree here with the examiner and the staff recommendation. So I'm going to fully support.
I have to also concur. I don't see that the evidence supported supported a determination by the hearing examiner that was clearly in error. I have to also agree with Commissioner Topchian that I do see the California Civil Code to define substantial compliance as in such a matter that you're either in compliance or you're out of it, and that paperwork was either filed or it was not. And in this case, it simply was not. I also do agree with the recommendation from staff that the air conditioning unit was replaced sufficiently. And I do also have to agree that a doorbell is going to be an individual issue, not a common area issue as applied to the RSO that we have before us.
I would agree with my fellow commissioners. There is a working doorbell in place. I don't see the difference whether it's through the building's wiring or the individual's wiring. There was an air conditioning unit that was replaced with a like-for-like unit, so that has been restored. My comments to the landlord, almost making it sound as if the process of re-registering a unit requires deep legal research and is onerous and multiple paperwork. It's basically a one-sheet document that gets filled out at a change of tenancy. And I understand that sometimes things do slip through the cracks, But our rent stabilization department kind of hammers this home multiple times in our mailings that you cannot take a rent increase unless the unit's been re-registered. If you've not re-registered units, rectify that. So we kind of bring that to the public's attention over and over and over again. It's not an onerous process. It is not one that requires legal assistance. So while I understand that you may feel that you are being punished by having to write a check to the tenant, it's not punitive. It is merely giving back money which you were never entitled to in the first place. So I'm saying this in general and also out to the public that, again, I always tell property owners, check your files. Are all of your units re-registered? If not, time to rectify that. Thank you.
I would just, excuse me, without repeating what everyone just said, I'll start from the beginning and repeat what everyone just said. Actually, I agree with all things that have been said. I just want to say about add a little bit to the rent reduction is there are certain steps that need to be taken before an increase can be put in place, and in this case it wasn't. It might have been accident. Regardless of what the reason was, the rent increase was not justifiable, so that overcharge is simply returned. It's not a punishment to anyone, although it may feel like it financially. We're just kind of doing a do-over. And so that money should be returned to the tenant. And having said that, I would entertain a motion to...
I'll do
I'd
it.
like to
I'll do it.
make a motion to...
Go ahead.
Commissioner
Oh,
Maggio.
Commissioner Maggio, sorry. Commissioner Maggio, go ahead.
Go for it.
I ask that you adopt Resolution RSC 18-519, a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood, affirming in part and reversing in part the hearing examiner's decision in D4296.
Second.
Are there any more discussion? All right, we'll do it. I'm sorry? Sorry, we're already in our deliberations. I'm sorry, we can't. Can we go ahead and do a roll call?
Yeah. Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Gregoire,
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian,
Aye.
Commissioner Charity,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein,
Aye.
Chair Kirby's.
Aye. Thank you. Now we will go back to the original.
Questions to see staff.
If Ms. Davis has a question, David.
Yeah, Ms.
she
Davis,
might-
if you have a question, maybe
could-
staff might be able to answer, but we just aren't able to.
Please come up to the
address.
staff.
It's for the staff, though, not for us, yeah. We're going to move on to the, if you,
After
can
the
you
meeting.
go over to the other side?
After the meeting,
please?
ma'am. After the meeting, we can talk to you.
They don't want us to do
Was that no longer? Oh, okay.
that. So we're going to go back to the first appeal on our agenda to see if the tenant or the landlord a representative has arrived, which I don't have in front of me.
Carradine?
I'm looking for the actual appeal. Can you read off the number?
23 Friedman.
Yeah, I'm looking for, thank you, that's what I'm looking for. This is D4268, 8231 Fountain Avenue. Is the representative for the landlord or the tenant present? If not, we'll proceed with staff report in the deliberations.
Thank you. Sandra Carradine applied for a rent decrease claiming substantial reductions in housing services and failure to perform maintenance. She was awarded a rent decrease on some issues, but not on others, and has appealed the issues on which she was not awarded a rent decrease. She also appeals the second finding of fact, which stated that her rent is due on the first of the month. She alleges that there's no evidence in the record to support that finding. Staff recommends that the Commission affirm in part and reverse in part the hearing examiner's decision. There is substantial evidence in the record supporting the hearing examiner's conclusion denying a rent decrease on the appealed issues with the exception of the screens. The record shows that either the tenant didn't meet her burden of proof to show a substantial reduction of a housing service, or the hearing examiner found that other evidence was more credible. With respect to the screens, however, the issue was adequately raised in her decreased application, so the record does need further development to determine if there has been a substantial reduction in that housing service. With respect to the second finding of fact, the appellant is correct that there was no testimony about her rental due date, so staff does recommend that that finding be stricken from the record. I will just inform the commission this. You will still need to do your deliberations, but it's my understanding that the tenant and the landlord have reached an agreement for the tenant to move out of the unit. So this could largely be moot, but at the moment she is still in the unit, so the commission does need to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? And before we begin our deliberations, I just want to ask one more time if there's the representative for the tenant or the landlord for 8231 Fountain Avenue, this appeal. All right, seeing none, we'll move into our deliberations. Would anyone like to begin?
Well, this was a fun read. I regret that they're not here to argue it out, but that's fine. And yes, I agree with the staff's recommendation. I saw the evidence to support the hearing examiner's decision, and I also did see that there was a lack of evidence for the rent being paid on the first, and I can understand the staff's recommendation about the screens.
Any other comments?
Just in agreement with the staff recommendation, affirming in part and reversing in part.
Okay. And is staff asking us to remand the screen portion back to the hearing examiner?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Any other comments?
I agree with staff's recommendation to remand that particular issue back to the hearing examiner.
If there are no other comments, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure. I can make a motion to adopt Resolution RSC 18-518, a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood, affirming in part and reversing in part the hearing examiner's decision in D-4268.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Gregoire?
Aye.
Commissioner Topchian?
Aye.
Commissioner Charity?
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
Aye.
Chair Kirpies?
Aye. All right, thank you. All right, we will now move on to unfinished business. We'll move into the cost sharing for cost sharing for mandatory seismic retrofitting. Our staff report, or our staff member is out in the hallway, I believe, right?
Yes, I can just let you know that, so this continues the discussion about whether or not to pass along the costs of the seismic retrofitting, whether or not there should be an automatic pass-through or whether or not the current process for applying for a rent increase should be utilized. And so this recommends setting up an ad hoc committee, a subcommittee, to further analyze that issue. So the commission can discuss among themselves if they are interested in being on that committee. It's a 7-member body, so obviously you cannot have more than 3 people on a subcommittee.
Yeah, I think because we only have 6 sitting commissioners, would that number change?
It would not. It's the number as a whole once you're all present.
All right, so we'll discuss the first half now, and then we'll hopefully by the time we finish this part, then we'll go back to the second portion of commenting about the calendar and participation in the community outreach efforts for this dialogue with the community. And hopefully by then Peter will be back in here and can maybe add to and tell us what the calendar looks like. So this was brought up, this is an ad hoc committee, it would be 3 people. Basically, the commission is being asked to be, all of us be active at the community meetings, but the ad hoc committee would be also involved in helping with the outreach for these community meetings, participate in them, So you would be asked to attend all of the community meetings, or most of them, and be an active and engaged in all of those. Is there interest or questions about what our intention is here for the ad hoc committee?
No?
Or is there?
Sort of. So the ad hoc committee would not be necessarily making recommendations for any policy issues. The ad hoc committee sounds to be more representing the commission at the community meetings, listening and bringing some of those thoughts back.
It's because all of us will be engaged, or hopefully will be engaged in all of these. There won't be necessarily us as individual commissioners bringing things back. Staff will bring back a formal report of what happens at the meetings, but this is to be engaged in helping to increase the outreach. So prior to the meeting, planning how the meeting would best, whether through flyers or social media or whatever other means that the city has available, this would be kind of the planning of the outreach portion. So the PR committee, in a way. Does that make?
So not making any recommendations to the commission?
Not
generate
on
any
policy,
ideas.
as you just mentioned, but definitely engaged in making recommendations directly to staff and to the commission, if necessary, different ideas for increased engagement.
So outreach.
Yes.
I don't see Ms. Regan nodding, or so. Is that on track from your understanding?
I mean, looking at the staff report, it says to form an ad hoc subcommittee to further analyze rent adjustments using net operating income, explore a possible direct cost pass-through alternative, and be involved in community engagement events and activities. So if the subcommittee wanted to analyze the substance, I think you could, but I think that would certainly be up to those who are on the subcommittee. I will say that the City Council also asked to explore why Santa Monica chose not to implement a pass-through, so that's certainly something that the subcommittee could explore as well. But it's really up to you all how you want to handle it.
So I guess if we're going to, I would suggest if there is an interest in forming a subcommittee on policy and analyzing the adjustments, that be a separate committee, because what I'm hoping that this engagement ad hoc committee will be is engaged and really promoting getting residents out, getting landlords out, all stakeholders out, whether through surveys. I mean, really focusing on outreach. I don't see this as something that one could really have time to do both if they're really engaged in this, to be able to both analyze and or be expected to analyze separately from the commission and promote. This really, I would like at least one ad hoc committee to just focus on outreach, if the commission agrees.
Well, can't it just be one and the division could be within the ad hoc?
There might be different people interested in.
It's going to be hard to break it up, I think.
Well, I don't think it's necessary
So maybe I
to
could
have
make a suggestion. So the calendar that's in your packet, it looks like there was to ask you to confirm your availability for these community meetings. So there's a suggestion that there's a community meeting on May 9th, May 14th, and June 23rd. So if you wanted to start with this engagement subcommittee, you could start with those first 3 meetings and engage with the community that way. And then if you wanted to move on to substance following those meetings, you could do it that way. Because these looks like these community meetings are coming up fairly shortly.
Mm-hmm.
But at one point, the commission will have to discuss, right, some sort of a maybe recommendation, or not recommendation, maybe a position, announcing the position on the whether the cost recovery should be implemented or the increase, right? At one point, we have to discuss. So if we're going to discuss it, why the ad hoc committee cannot prepare something and present it to the commission, so it would make the rest of the commissioner's job kind of easier to have already deal with something more specific, more concrete.
And that's definitely an option we can go in.
Yeah.
My emphasis is on outreach, though. All of us can do our jobs, but we can do it better if we've got more input from the community. And so I think the idea of the ad hoc committee, and really, not that the other idea is bad or wrong, I'm just really concerned about outreach.
I see.
And so maybe we do, at a later date, change the direction of what the ad hoc subcommittee is responsible for, but I think right now we just need to focus on, or at least one of the committees just needs to focus on getting people out to educate them on what's in front of us and to hear their comments. And
I would be hesitant to bifurcate out into two separate committees or two overlapping. I think one, if we are, I don't think any of us is going to come up with a grand new idea for outreach. I think we can all do our part in that, work with our council members, for those that are direct appointees, or with council at large. But in particular, if the subcommittee members as well as the commission are attending the public meetings beginning on May 9th, we're going to hear the feedback firsthand from tenants and landlords. So I'm not sure I would be in favor of having a separate committee. I think one subcommittee. We're also on a short timeline, as Ms. Reagan pointed out. There could be really coming up unless I would just be in favor of keeping it one subcommittee. All of us as individual commissioners do whatever work we can to help get the word out. But again, I don't think we're going to find some new avenue that the city hasn't already thought of for getting the public engaged.
That's right.
Is this, if I may clarify, is this from, the recommendation comes from the city council to the commission, or this is
comes
staff's
from me and
recommendation?
Peter.
Huh?
It comes from me and Peter.
It's from staff, okay.
I mean, I see that we have a lot of meetings on calendar. I don't see why we can't make our best efforts to attend these community meetings and have a discussion in our regularly scheduled meetings about our recommendations for community outreach, or our thoughts on pass-through and NOI. I feel like we can make those recommendations in our meeting and attend these meetings, commit to attending them.
And not have an ad hoc?
Yeah.
I guess we're looking for more than recommendations. We're looking for almost boots on the ground type of outreach, ideally. But I am not in favor of having a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee for the purpose of coming up with a recommendation. I think that this is a large enough issue that we shouldn't place that on 3 individuals, nor should anyone feel that we're limited to whatever those 3 individuals come up with as a recommendation. I mean, we're going to hear lots of different viewpoints from the community. We're going to hear lots of different ideas on how to resolve this. And I think that we should hash those out, all 7 of us together in front of the public.
Right, and I see the July 12th calendar says, cost-sharing seismic retrofitting recommendation to City Council. So we are tasked with, by July 12th, to make a recommendation to City Council, just confirming, correct?
That's the.
I mean, that's it says July
goal.
2018, that obviously not set in stone. So, I mean, but it looks like that was a goal.
May I speak? I'm willing to attend some or all of these meetings. I think they'll be informative, and I want to be there to be supportive not only of the public but the commission. However, I'm not available to be a member of the ad hoc. I just finished with the proactive enforcement. And to suddenly,
Yeah.
if others will have to do the job this time, it's a commitment. It's a lot of work to do ad hoc. And ours worked very smoothly, and we enjoyed it. But sometimes there's scheduling issues, and I think this one becomes a little bit more complicated. But I do commit going to May 9, 14th, and 23 to be there, to listen, to get all the information I need and bring it back. I'm not sure I will be a participant, though, there, but I'm interested in all the information.
So before we move, so can we come to an agreement whether we want an ad hoc committee at all? If we do, how do we want that? What do we want the ad hoc committee to do? And I'm not suggesting it, but is there a need for a second one?
Is there what?
Is there a need for a second one?
If we don't do an ad hoc committee, what would be the process, I guess I'm looking to staff, for the comments that come forward at the 3 meetings in May? How would those comments come back to this commission for further discussion for policy recommendations?
Staff would gather those comments and bring those back to the commission, and to the extent that the commissioners were there, you can comment on what you've heard.
Yeah. Look, Chair Kirby seems to think that there'd be some value in an ad hoc committee with respect to the community outreach, and I'm not able, due to personal commitments, to participate in such an ad hoc committee, but if we have 2 or 3 people on the commission who are interested in doing that, I see no reason why we wouldn't appoint an ad hoc committee. So if there are people who are interested,
I don't think anyone is
there
interested in
any,
doing it.
yeah.
It's clear.
So there's not an interest of 2 to 3 people.
I
For that
have to be
specific
honest, I'm not interested in, I will do my best to attend these meetings, at least most of them. And I have my concerns regarding the ways how the charges would be implemented. And I have my questions and concerns. Of course, I want to have a discussion on that sometime in the future, whether in the commission or in a format, whatever format it will be appropriate. But as Vice Chair Bergstein and Commissioner Maggio, we just worked on the proactive code enforcement issues, and I don't think I can commit to serve on another ad hoc committee at this time. But I have my concerns, as I said, about these.
I didn't hear what the concerns of implementation of what?
Implementation, which way we can go, whether it should be the fixed amount or versus the
the actual
increases,
policy.
or those the policies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so those questions, I still have them.
If there are 2 others willing to serve on the ad hoc, it was a painless process on the last ad hoc committee. I'm happy to serve on another, but only if there are 2 other commissioners willing to serve.
So in my head, I was thinking that, one, I have an interest, so I would like to be on it, but it doesn't have to be me. I think that you bring something of the mentality of a landlord that you might be able to think of to keep our outreach efforts focused, or not to forget to reach out to landlords. And then I just thought of Commissioner Topchian as well, because of Russian language and his involvement in the Russian community. But I know he'll do that anyway, so I'm not going to guilt you into it.
We could volunteer Lindsay's appointee before she's sworn in. It's a condition of your being sworn in. You must serve on this committee.
So I guess
it sounds like no one's interested in being a participant.
There's only maybe 2 at best that would serve on the ad hoc committee. Is it necessary then to have an ad hoc committee for this is talking specifically about engagement attempts to help outreach. Do you have any thoughts?
Is the question, is it necessary to have an ad hoc committee, or
Well,
is the
is it
question?
helpful to you to have an ad hoc committee of 2 people to help with outreach?
You can form an ad hoc committee of 2, and that would be helpful.
You want to serve on the ad hoc committee?
Yeah, because it's not more than 3, so 2 would satisfy.
Is there any objection for
No?
the 2 of us to serve on an ad hoc committee on, so our primary focus, until the commission would give us different direction if necessary, would be to focus on outreach, involved in community engagement events and activities, outreach. Does that work? Okay.
Sounds good.
So without any objection, we have this wonderful committee. Peter, we only talked about the first portion of, or actually the recommendation to the ad hoc committee. We didn't go too far into actual scheduling. We listed off the schedules, but I don't know if you had more to add to the staff report for that.
I really didn't. The purpose of bringing this back to the commission was to share our intent moving forward, because the hopes are that commissioners or most of the commission would be able to be present at these meetings. The ad hoc would have a role in the community meetings that are coming up, for instance, on May 9th, 14th, and then on June 23rd. But our hopes is that the other members of the commission would be there just silently observing. We also are bringing this because we know that summers get busy and we have vacation plans. So we'd like to hear if there's adjustments that we need to still make to other meetings so that the majority of commissioners could be present. Certainly we would want quorums at any of your meetings that we have here on the schedule.
So I had a question. I circled a few of the dates for the community meetings happening, but times, do you know, like for instance, May 9th, do you know what time the community meetings are scheduled?
Yeah, those,
Always 7?
the 9th and the 14th are both evening meetings, and I think that we have those set at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And then the 23rd is Saturday, and that one is set at 11 a.m., 11 to 2.
Okay.
And the 14th is 7 p.m.?
Correct, yeah. The May 9th and May 14th begins at 7 p.m. The May 9th meeting is at the library community room, and then the 14th is at Fiesta Hall in Plummer Park. We're going to be sending out a postcard to all tenants and landlords, notifying them of these dates and the topic of conversation. So the intent here is the first 2 meetings is really to pull more information, POLL, more information from the community on their receptivity to the cost sharing related to seismic retrofitting. And then between those 2 meetings in May and the June 23rd meeting, the commission will meet and will consider options, review additional analysis, so that at the June 23rd meeting, the intent is that the ad hoc commission, the staff, consultants can share the concepts that the commission is looking at, and if the commission is going in a certain direction, share that concept as well and receive additional information, feedback, and thoughts from the community before the commission ultimately makes or potentially considers a recommendation at your first meeting in July for the council. If we stick to this, if we're able to adhere to this schedule, the council meeting that we would target is August 9th. It's August 6th, I apologize. And that meeting is nice because the second mandatory retrofitting ordinance goes into effect on the 7th. So on August 7th. So we would be going to the council with the recommendation just before the effective date of that second ordinance.
Just to clarify, you said that the subcommittee's role at these public meetings would be to sort of silently observe and listen, and then that we can count on staff.
No, I'm hoping that all members of the commission can be there silently observing. The ad hoc will play an active role in the meetings. And we'll work with the city clerk on the Brown Act so that the two members of the ad hoc are very comfortable in your limits of your participation at the meetings.
But we can sort of rely on staff providing notes post-meeting as to the salient points that are brought up, so we're not frantically taking notes.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, and you'll have staff there present and a consultant present, so if there's questions to be answered, I think most of the questions should probably be answered by staff or the consultants, but you'll have the information that you need, and you'll have a comfort level with your limits under the Brown Act so that you'll be able to perform and be a part of that meeting.
I think the context, just to provide a little bit of context for his question, when you were out there, we were kind of talking about the purpose of the role of the ad hoc committee, and there was a question of the ad hoc committee bringing information back to the commission or a recommendation to the commission, and I was encouraging that the ad hoc committee be more of a at present and active and engaged, but do outreach, that all of us should be, participating, and that staff would bring back the data collected at the meetings, and then at any of our own personal, I think somebody else said, whatever individuals hear or see would be brought back as well. But the ad hoc committee is really to help get people there and to keep the people active and engaged during the process. Is that consistent with your?
Yeah, and this is a good question. I'm happy to clarify a little because certainly the next item on the agenda is a report out from an ad hoc that the commission formed. So we are asking you to form this ad hoc, and we're doing that under direction from the council. The council hasn't specifically asked you to form an ad hoc, but they have given us direction to increase our community outreach. And under that umbrella, we're asking you now to form this ad hoc. And so we have enough direction, I believe, to be a part of this process, to take the notes, to work with you on this ad hoc, to work with the ad hoc subcommittee on a higher level than we would typically work with if, for instance, you wanted to explore an item that we had not received express direction from the council to explore.
Thank you.
So you two are on the ad hoc.
Yes, the two of us, yeah. Do we have any other comments or any concerns about the calendar? No. All right. Do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not.
Okay. Then we will move on to the ad hoc committee, proactive code enforcement, the ad hoc committee report, final report. Is it staff giving the?
I'm happy to queue it up for the ad hoc committee, or the ad hoc subcommittee could just take it away.
I think, Rob, why don't you start with your notes?
Why don't you cue it up if you want to just make a couple brief comments, and then I'll dive in.
Sure, just to provide a little background, on January 11th of 2018, the Rent Stabilization Commission formed an ad hoc subcommittee to study proactive code enforcement and to report back to the full body of the commission. On March 14th, 2018, the ad hoc subcommittee met for the third time, finalized the attached report recommending that the Rent Stabilization Commission consider a recommendation to the City Council to direct staff to study the desirability and feasibility of implementing a routine inspection program of the city's rent-stabilized housing stock.
Thank you.
Is there a staff recommendation on this item?
Yes.
There's not a staff recommendation on this item.
This is an item that I'm delighted that we are further discussing. It's something that I had brought up in past study sessions and was very happy when Commissioner Charity also expressed interest, and I want to thank Mr. Charity for doing such an outstanding job of pulling together information on other municipalities. The concept of this is not City of West Hollywood reinventing the wheel or a new concept. So the subcommittee met 3 times. Essentially, what we did is pulled the pertinent language from existing other municipalities and then tried to see what we thought might work within the City of West Hollywood. I'm not sure I would actually call this proactive code enforcement. I would more call it routine inspections, but I think it's potato, potato. And as far as our report, we didn't want to get into too much detail because really what we're trying to do is just get the attention of City Council, get them thinking along this, and then hopefully they will decide to study it further and assign that to staff. We did do some discussion about how we might finance additional code compliance officers, but we feel, again, that would actually, if council were to approve it, that would go into Mr. Noonan's budget.
You're going to mention the numbers?
What numbers might those be?
We had the $2.
I don't think I wouldn't feel it appropriate at this point to talk about the financing of it until City Council decides if they want to move forward. Then they can direct staff into looking towards ways. We had just briefly thought perhaps another $1 a month on the annual registration, 50-50 between landlord and tenant. I did talk to city staff about community block development grants, which, while not impossible, really that goes more towards public safety, so that would probably not be an avenue for finance. But really, I would be hesitant for us to get into too much detail about how this might be implemented, how it might be financed. Really, I think what the committee is looking for is discussion among the commission, and then either moving it forward with a recommendation to council that they consider it. And with that, I would open up for questions and public comment.
It's interesting, this was one of the topics last night at the New Renters Alliance, and the questions about this type of inspection. Some of the comments were they felt it was an invasion to have this type of inspection, and I found that, and fear, which came up again, which I was not surprised about.
We've discussed that also a possibility as some of the community members raised their concerns of possibility of violating privacy or any of these type of concerns. However, if you remember during our discussions, the code enforcement will be required, the department will be required to send a notification, and if the tenant refuses entry, refuses to participate, then there wouldn't be any inspections. So the inspectors will not open the door and go inside the unit if the tenant doesn't provide permission. So therefore, there is no really a privacy matter here.
We felt
so
that
I
part
think
of that
that
might
should
have
be
been
explained to the way that it wouldn't, this program, if this program will exist, there wouldn't be any violation of privacy or anything like that.
We felt that more than likely with proper notice to tenants that if there are personal items you don't want lying about, you have plenty of time to take care of that. There was also discussion about basically an educational component for the immigrant communities to encourage them that this is the way, as part of what we said in here is that rental housing is more likely to be substandard than owner-occupied, and this, the program would relieve tenants of the burden of having to force reticent landlords to make needed repairs by having systematic inspections to ensure the rent-stabilized housing stock is maintained. So it takes the burden off the tenants. So it would be an education process, but again, we would leave that up to council directing staff on how that would move forward.
You mentioned this is voluntary. I don't think maybe I just didn't see it in the recommendation, but is that the recommendation that this be a voluntary program? So if a tenant did not want to be inspected, they could say, no, we don't.
I don't recall that being...
Not voluntary, no.
So then the tenant...
We don't know.
What are you recommending?
That city council direct staff.
Well, the recommendation is to study the desirability and feasibility, but you're not really making any recommendation on what that would look like.
I think we want the city council to make that decision. I think that was our intention. Although we were all very opinionated, and between us, I thought it was very interesting because we came up with a lot of different ideas. And, the fear issue, the invasion people would feel, hoarders being found out, things of that nature. But we accumulated this information. It's for everyone to read and to dissect, and the city council, of course, will make the ultimate decision. I know my own council member is very interested in this, and I believe other council members are as well.
I think any specifics, if council were to move forward, it would also be my hope that they would direct staff would report, it would come back to this commission for further discussion among this commission and with the public. So that would be my hopes for getting into the specifics.
Any other comments about it?
I just thank the ad hoc subcommittee. I think this is a great report. I would love city council to see it. I would be in favor of making a recommendation for them to explore this desirability and feasibility of a routine inspection program.
Do we want to file and report this?
We're not quite ready for that yet. So these are my comments, and I guess that I would hope that these get passed on to the city council when forming their opinion about this. Some of the things listed in here, while the landlord or their representative must be present, I'm not sure why, and I noticed that was an LA thing as well. I don't know why that's necessary. If anything, I'd rather have the tenant present than the landlord. I think that having the landlord present creates a situation where many tenants, the way they survive is in their living environment is the fact that the landlord and them have worked out some sort of system where they avoid each other. They each meet their responsibilities, but have decided not to interact with each other. And I think that will be burdensome for some tenants if the landlord or their representative must be present for the inspection.
I think that was designed that if the tenant could not be there, then of course the landlord would be the second choice.
Or it could be a legal reason for it. So I think if it's directed to staff, so staff will definitely do research, see why, for example, in other jurisdictions they require the landlord to be present. So maybe there is a legal explanation.
Yeah. I would also recommend that I would encourage that this be a voluntary program, that if tenants did not feel comfortable having folks come in, they don't have to let anyone in. That they're already required to let the landlord come in and when the landlord needs to come in for certain things. This is a program that claims to benefit or provide a benefit. It also benefits landlords, I know, but it provides a benefit for tenants. So the tenant should be able to refuse that, I think. And regardless of whether they're able to, or regardless of whether they move forward with allowing the tenant to deny entry, as they do their annual report, if they could also include things like maybe tenant surveys of, they could be set up to figure out what the tenant's concerns are. Also, what a recording of how many times the tenant tried to deny access or was present or anything like that, just so that we have the statistics throughout the year. On this last page where it says things that might be inspected for, I would expand that list to things like signage and these are pretty much safety and building and safety standards for the most part. But if we could also include things to be looked for, as like management hours, the emergency phone numbers, all the things that the RSO requires.
To make
also,
sure they're there. To make sure they're there,
that they're
because
present.
it's already the law.
Yeah.
All right.
And that we might as well, if we're spending the time, they're going to go out and spend, at least 5 or 10 minutes preparing to go to a building. So in that, if they could also find some sort of way of maybe checking for unit re-registration forms, just simply, hey, did you move in on this date? Great. Is this your name? Great. Just so the city can, it wouldn't change responsibility of registration forms, but at least we would be proactive as well in making sure that re-registration forms are updated. And then it's an opportunity to distribute any information about RSO regulations and how to educate folks, or how to report problems for tenants. So if tenants have a problem, we can just give them information about how to report throughout the year, just to make sure we're maximizing the most out of whatever program might get set up.
I think those are good ideas. You're saying, in essence, to engage everyone as much as possible.
Yeah, if we have an opportunity
And
to.
they have a right not to enter if they feel uncomfortable about it. But there's tremendous benefits, you know, if they could get things fixed, and a lot could be accomplished.
Save a lot of relationships between tenants and landlords.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it has a benefit in that
Yeah,
way.
I really like it. It's not putting the onus on the tenant to, oh, I'm a problem-causing tenant because I'm complaining. It's, no, the city is actually inspecting and making the landlord. I just like how it feels.
And I do want to thank the three of you for working on this. You spent a lot of time on this, and really appreciate it. This was a lot of good information.
Is there no public comment?
Is there any public comment on this item?
Wesley, did Amanda send you with some notes? You're off the hook. Public comment.
No public comment. All right. Did we
back
have
down?
any additional? Do you need us to vote to send
Well,
this?
we need a recommendation. So if it is the draft motion that is in the attachment on the final report, if you would just clarify that that is the recommendation, and then take a second and do a roll call.
Can we recommend it with attached discussion notes?
Right, the draft motion with I had a couple typos in there, so if somebody wants to clean that up, but other than that.
I wasn't going to say anything. That motion,
That's my motion. How's that?
Second.
do we understand the motion?
I think so.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No one's ever applauded us before.
So now we'll move into
We did something right.
public comments, and I believe we have one.
And as we have the public speaker, if you'll call him, I'd like to just take a moment and explain the next step that's going to happen with this motion.
Sure. So Rick Watts, if you'd like to come to the podium. And in the meantime, we will hear
As Rick comes down, so the commission has passed this recommendation. So the next step on recommendations of this nature is that it will go to the subcommittee of the council to be considered. Those two council members, the mayor and the vice mayor, will make the decision whether it's heard by the full council.
Just to clarify, when we did, the one about the proposed non-smoking ordinance, I thought it was just included in the consent calendar. Did it still go before
Correct.
that subcommittee first?
The city council has clarified how boards and commissions can make recommendations, and this is the procedure that the council is now following.
And which two council members are on that?
It will be the mayor and the vice mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor and the mayor pro tem.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Rick Watts, City of West Hollywood. I am a renter just up the street from City Hall. This is not a disagreement with our landlord. On the contrary, this is an issue where virtually every tenant in our building and the landlord are on the same side. We have a problem in our building that we've been getting almost no help from the city on thus far. We've gotten help from the sheriff's department, who have been called out to the property more north of 24 times in 6 months, resulting in 5, 6, or 7 arrests that I'm aware of, I believe, of persons associated with one of the tenants in our building. In those 6 months since this particular tenant moved in, doors have been blocked open, locks have been vandalized, people coming and going at all hours of day or night, people climbing over walls and fences. You kind of get the idea of what's probably going on. There have been 4 car burglaries in the building immediately to our north, where some of these individuals have been crawling over the fence to get in. One of those arrests were associated with one of those burglaries. Between our landlord, who has faced many thousands of dollars worth of costs in repeatedly defeated security augmentations and legal costs associated with the people who have been burglarized next door, and the personnel costs associated with the repeated calls of deputies to the property, and paramedics on at least 2 occasions. I'm going to guess that the cost of this whole affair right now is probably approaching, if not has already exceeded, somewhere around $100,000 to the taxpayers and to individuals. And yet we have gotten almost no help from the city. I want to read into the record a particular section of code, California Penal Code 373A. Every person who maintains, permits, or allows a public nuisance to exist upon his or her property or premises, and every person occupying or leasing the property or premises of another who maintains or permits or allows a public nuisance to exist thereon after reasonable notice in writing from a health officer or district attorney or city attorney or prosecuting attorney to remove, discontinue, or abate the same has been served upon such person is guilty of a misdemeanor and shall be punished accordingly. And the existence of such nuisance for each and every day after the service of such notice shall be deemed a separate and distinct offense, and it is hereby made the duty of the district attorney or the city attorney of any city, the charter of which imposes a duty upon the city attorney to prosecute the state demeanors, to prosecute all persons guilty of violating this section until, by continuous prosecutions, until the nuisance is abated and removed. That's all I have. Thank you.
Steph, can we ask questions, Steph? I just want to ask a question. What address?
1264 North Sweetser.
And just getting to speaking, no.
Commissioner, yeah, this
Sure,
is
no
not on
problem.
the agenda.
And it
Just
is
to
not
give a
the
comment.
civil code. This is California Penal Code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No other public comments? We'll move to staff comments. Or commission comments, sorry, commission comments. Any other commission comments?
I just want to announce that as liaison to disability, I did attend part of that meeting last night, and I was very impressed with the meeting and the people that attended and the various agencies that were there to explain all the services that are given to people who have disabilities, and I was very impressed with that, and I wanted to report back.
Thank you. No other comments? All right, now we'll move to staff.
No staff comments.
All right. Well, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
All right. We're adjourning the rent stabilization meeting till May 10th will be our next meeting.
David, I was...